this year, and they will double that when their works are in good going order. October was close at hand. Spring was come. It was really spring. Everybody said so, but you could have sold it for summer in Canada, and nobody would have suspected. It was the very weather that makes our home summers the perfection of climatic luxury. I mean, when you are out in the wood or by the sea. But these people said it was cool now. A person ought to see Sydney in the summertime if he wanted to know what warm weather is, and he ought to go north 10 or 1500 miles if he wanted to know what hot weather is. They said that away up there toward the equator the hens laid fried eggs. Sydney is the place to go to get information about other people's climates. It seems to me that the occupation of unbiased traveler seeking information is the pleasantest and most irresponsible trade there is. The traveler can always find out anything he wants to, merely by asking. He can get at all the facts and more. Everybody helps him, nobody hinders him. Anybody who has an old fact in stock that is no longer negotiable in the domestic market will let him have it at his own price. An accumulation of such goods is easily and quickly made. They cost almost nothing, and they bring par in the foreign market. Travelers who come to America always freight up with the same old nursery tales that their predecessors selected, and they carry them back and always work them off, without any trouble, in the home market. If the climates of the world were determined by parallels of latitude, then we could know a place's climate by its position on the map, and so we should know that the climate of Sydney was the counterpart of the climate of Columbia, South Carolina, and of Little Rock, Arkansas, since Sydney is about the same distance south of the equator that those other towns are north of it, 34 degrees. But no, climate disregards the parallels of latitude. In Arkansas they have a winter. In Sydney they have the name of it, but not the thing itself. I have seen the ice in the Mississippi floating past the mouth of the Arkansas River, and at Memphis, but a little way above, the Mississippi has been frozen over from bank to bank. But they have never had a cold spell in Sydney which brought the mercury down to freezing point. Once in a midwinter day there, in the month of July, the mercury went down to 36 degrees, and that remains the memorable cold day in the history of the town. No doubt Little Rock has seen it below zero. Once, in Sydney, in midsummer, about New Year's Day, the mercury went up to 106 degrees in the shade, and that is Sydney's memorable hot day. That would about tally with Little Rock's hottest day also, I imagine. My Sydney figures are taken from a government report, and are trustworthy. In the matter of summer weather, Arkansas has no advantage over Sydney, perhaps, but when it comes to winter weather, that is another affair. You could cut up an Arkansas winter into 100 Sydney winters and have enough left for Arkansas and the poor. The whole narrow, hilly belt of the Pacific side of New South Wales has the climate of its capital, a mean winter temperature of 54 degrees and a mean summer one of 71 degrees. It is a climate which cannot be improved upon for healthfulness. But the experts say that 90 degrees in New South Wales is harder to bear than 112 degrees in the neighboring colony of Victoria, because the atmosphere of the former is humid and of the latter dry. The mean temperature of the southernmost point of New South Wales is the same as that of Nice, 60 degrees, yet Nice is further from the equator by 460 miles than is the former. But nature is always stingy of perfect climates, stingier in the case of Australia than usual. Apparently this vast continent has a really good climate nowhere but around the edges. If we look at a map of the world, we are surprised to see how big Australia is. It is about two-thirds as large as the United States was before we added Alaska. But whereas one finds a sufficiently good climate and fertile land almost everywhere in the United States, it seems settled that inside of the Australian border belt one finds many deserts and in spots a climate which nothing can stand except a few of the hardier kinds of rocks. In effect, Australia is as yet unoccupied. If you take a map of the United States and leave the Atlantic seaboard states in their places, also the fringe of southern states from Florida west to the mouth of the Mississippi, also a narrow inhabited streak up the Mississippi halfway to its headwaters, also a narrow inhabited border along the Pacific coast, then take a brushful of paint and obliterate the whole remaining mighty stretch of country that lies between the Atlantic States and the Pacific coast strip, your map will look like the latest map of Australia. This stupendous blank is hot, not to say torrid. A part of it is fertile, the rest is desert. It is not liberally watered. It has no towns. One has only to cross the mountains of New South Wales and descend into the westward lying regions to find that he has left the choice climate behind him and found a new one of a quite different character. In fact, he would not know by the thermometer that he was not in the blistering plains of India. Captain Sturt, the great explorer, gives us a sample of the heat. The wind, which had been blowing all the morning from the northeast, increased to a heavy gale, and I shall never forget its withering effect. I sought shelter behind a large gum tree, but the blasts of heat were so terrific that I wondered the very grass did not take fire. This really was nothing ideal. Everything both animate and inanimate gave way before it. The horses stood with their backs to the wind and their noses to the ground, without the muscular strength to raise their heads. The birds were mute, and the leaves of the trees under which we were sitting fell like a snow shower around us. At noon I took a thermometer, graded to 127 degrees, out of my box, and observed that the mercury was up to 125. Thinking that it had been unduly influenced, I put it in the fork of a tree close to me, sheltered alike from the wind and the sun. I went to examine it about an hour afterwards, when I found the mercury had risen to the top of the instrument and had burst the bulb, a circumstance that I believe no traveler has ever before had to record. I cannot find language to convey to the reader's mind an idea of the intense and oppressive nature of the heat that prevailed. That hot wind sweeps over Sydney sometimes, and brings with it what is called a dust storm. It is said that most Australian towns are acquainted with the dust storm. I think I know what it is like, for the following description by Mr. Gain tallies very well with the alkali dust storm of Nevada, if you leave out the shovel part. Still, the shovel part is a pretty important part, and seems to indicate that my Nevada storm is but a poor thing after all. As we proceeded, the altitude became less, and the heat proportionately greater, until we reached Dubbo, which is only 600 feet above sea level. It is a pretty town, built on an extensive plain. After the effects of a shower of rain have passed away, the surface of the ground crumbles into a thick layer of dust, and occasionally, when the wind is in a particular quarter, it is lifted bodily from the ground in one long opaque cloud. In the midst of such a storm nothing can be seen a few yards ahead, and the unlucky person who happens to be out at the time is compelled to seek the nearest retreat at hand. When the thrifty housewife sees in the distance the dark column advancing in a steady whirl towards her house, she closes the doors and windows with all expedition. A drawing-room, the window of which has been carelessly left open during a dust storm, is indeed an extraordinary sight. A lady who has resided in Dubbo for some years says that the dust lies so thick on the carpet that it is necessary to use a shovel to remove it. And probably a wagon. I was mistaken. I have not seen a proper dust storm. To my mind the exterior aspects and character of Australia are fascinating things to look at and think about, they are so strange, so weird, so new, so uncommonplace, such a startling and interesting contrast to the other sections of the planet, the sections that are known to us all, familiar to us all. In the matter of particulars, a detail here, a detail there, we have had the choice climate of New South Wales sea-coast. We have had the Australian heat as furnished by Captain Sturt, we have had the wonderful dust storm, and we have considered the phenomenon of an almost empty hot wilderness half as big as the United States, with a narrow belt of civilization, population, and good climate around it. End of chapter 9.